Welcome to The Scoop. This is the Mackinac Center interview series. It's a free-flowing conversation where we talk about current topics that are going on, particularly as they relate to Michigan. So last night here in Michigan, the governor gave her state address. This is her second address. And we've got Mike LaFaive. He's the Senior Director of Fiscal Policy here at the Mackinac Center, and James Hohman, Director of Fiscal Policy. So these guys have been at the center for a long time. You've watched a lot of State of the States. Mike, I know you've done research going back years on governors giving their state addresses. First of all, can you just tell us what is the State of the State address? Why should we care about it?
Well, it's an opportunity for every governor to not only tell the legislature and the people of Michigan where the state has been in the previous year, where it is today, and where that particular governor wants to lead the state going forward. Part of that leadership is laying out various proposals to do what the governor thinks is necessary to make Michigan a better place to live and work and raise a family.
It's the governors on their best behavior, trying to make the best case for the policies they want in the next year. And that's what I think is what's meaningful about it. It's them trying to put their best face in what they want to do.
So it's somewhat similar to the State of the Union address that the president gives?
Yeah, this time was a little different because there wasn't an audience, but right. Most years.
And in most years, the President of the United States and many governors, not just ours, will have their own gallery of viewers and take time to point out someone who has done heroic work in the years previous.
So what did we hear last night? Anything particularly interesting about this address?
Well, the opening montage I thought was the most interesting from my perspective because she talked about accomplishing bipartisan work to make Michigan a better place to live and work. So you have her recognizing auto insurance reform and the Clean Slate initiative done in a bipartisan way. And then it was a great segue into her talk about bipartisanship going forward. Whether or not that bipartisanship continues with proposals that she laid out is another matter, and we'll see.
I mean, I thought what was interesting was what wasn't in it. The governor and the legislature have butted heads constantly over the past 2 years. And this one, she didn't mention that. She was optimistic about things going forward, and that could mean a lot for this year, given that we do need both the legislature and the executive working together to address this COVID-19 pandemic.
So
that hasn't been happening for the past year.
So the Mackinac Center, obviously we're a free market think tank. One of the things that you guys do is you add up the number of expansions of government that the governor mentions and the limitations. So what did we see in terms of that last night?
Last night she offered up 9 new expansions of state government and offered 0 limitations on state government, that is, opportunities to rein growth of state government in. That's pretty consistent. Last year she offered 8 new expansions and 0 limitations. In fact, we've cataloged the expansions and limitations of every governor going back to Governor Milliken, and her proposed limitations on government are so far the fewest offered by any of the last 5 governors.
How's this? So that was my next question, was to be, how does she compare to other governors? So she's offered more expansions, no limitations, can't go lower than that. What have we seen from other governors in the past?
Well, she doesn't hold the record for the most expansions offered on average for governors. That goes to Governor Granholm, who offered up something like 16.9 new expansions of state government over her tenure here. Governor Snyder had been the holder of the record for offering the most fewest limitations on government, but it doesn't look like he's going to hold that record throughout the Whitmer administration now.
Yeah, it's pretty common that governors offer more expansions than they do restrictions. That's nothing new, but just how few the governor has provided, or how few restrictions the governor has recommended, I think is noteworthy, especially since she has some victories in restricting government. I mean, drivers are no longer required to purchase unlimited injury protection. That's a huge win for consumers. And I would like to see some more interest in working with Republicans in the legislatures over common sense restrictions in what government can do.
Fun fact, Jared, if you go back to the Milliken administration. You really have to go back to the Milliken administration to find the one governor who had a State of the State address where he offered 0 expansions of government in his State of the State address. Every governor since he made his 74 address, Engler, Blanchard, Granholm, Snyder, Whitmer, have offered some type of proposal that would have expanded the scope of state government in Michigan.
Yeah, and I mean, it's state of state, it's laying things out. You think there's some incentives to talk about what you want government to do rather than what you want it to do less of. Regardless of whether it's Democrats or Republicans, it seems you generally get more of the expansions. Any other main takeaways that you heard from her speech? Any specific expansions that you think are interesting or new this year?
Well, there's an attempt to resurrect a program that had sunset previously, known as the Good Jobs for Michigan program. It was a corporate subsidy program that sunset, but that she wants to bring back in the hope of subsidizing corporations to come to or expand in Michigan.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate because in the last 2 years, the governor was responsible for overseeing policymaking that authorized the least amount of business subsidies over at least the past 20 years. So this is kind of a reconsidering of her previous agenda. It will be tough going. It has to go through the legislature, obviously, and they may be more skeptical than they have been in previous years. So that's going to be a fight that happens in 2021, and we're going to be paying a lot of attention to it.
Yeah, and so obviously Governor Whitmer, she's a Democrat. We have a Democratic governor. We have Republicans that are controlling the state house and Senate. The Republicans had reheld the state house in November, so that's a kind of a new situation since the last election. Do you think that she's more likely to call for those things knowing she might get some pushback from the legislature? What have you seen from lawmakers that have signaled their interest?
So in the Granholm administration, the only thing that Republicans and Democrats seemed to be able to agree on was that businesses need to be subsidized more. I think we live in a very different environment where there's newfound skepticism from both Republicans and from Democrats that business subsidies are effective and fair. That's something that's going to be new, and in 2021 there's going to be another test about whether that newfound skepticism is strong enough to reject this if it's part of the governor's agenda.
Yeah, and the Granholm years were obviously a lot of economic turmoil happening, generally speaking. So
a lot of that today.
Right. So Governor Whitmer inherited a strong economy. We've had obviously the COVID crisis. Is this economic worry something that's driving more subsidies? Why shouldn't lawmakers want to help out the business community, Mike, if we're having such economic calamity?
Well, there's the assumption that it really is a net help for the business community because ultimately the subsidies have to be paid by someone. So what we see is government confiscate tens, hundreds of millions of dollars from businesses and people all over Michigan and give it to the few that some bureaucrats in Lansing believe will be the next great job provider and provide more jobs than they otherwise would have without such a program. The empirical evidence on these programs is pretty clear. They're ineffective, they're very expensive, especially in terms of opportunity cost, and they're fundamentally unfair.
How is the most important thing that the governor can do right now to help out businesses is to ensure efficient distribution of the vaccine so that we can return to normal, and for her to ease the restrictions that she's made upon businesses. That matters much more than handing out a couple of deals to select companies.
It's early, but this one of the things the state does is kind of sets the groundwork for when the governor is going to introduce her budget, and then when lawmakers introduce their budget. Anything you saw this morning from what are legislators thinking right now? Are they setting the table for any of these fights that we can expect?
So when the pandemic first started, lawmakers were very concerned that the state budget was going to take a huge hit. That never materialized. What we thought was going to be an over 10% loss in state revenues, when it comes down to it, is less than 2%. And on top of that, the federal government has given the state of Michigan money hand over fist and continues to do so this year, and apparently is expected to next year. We're not going to be talking about how to effectively work with less money. We're going to be talking about what is the biggest priorities for the additional federal money that has come in. That's going to be the debate for this year.
Lawmakers were jockeying over budget issues coming up to the State of the State address. In fact, last week on more than a week ago, January 19th, Governor Whitmer had unveiled a $5.6 billion supplemental bill, and lawmakers in the legislature have already dismissed it and said, well, here's our bill, here's our supplemental bill, it's smaller and better.
So we've had a state budget that has kind of withstood despite a terrible economy brought on by COVID, but we're getting a lot of extra federal money. That's a dangerous time for taxpayers in some ways. Any final thoughts on what we can expect for 2021?
Well, the Biden administration is preparing a new spending plan that would accommodate state and local units to too great a degree. One component of it is a $350 billion check to state and local governments that includes flexible opportunities.
That's above and beyond what we're talking about right now.
Oh, that's absolutely. And what we're worried about is the guardrails aren't quite like they used to be in previous stimulus packages or assistance packages, and that money could be used for things like bailing out Illinois' pension funds rather than addressing pandemic-related issues.
Yeah. The Biden administration is going beyond providing relief to governments and just piling on additional spending with the excuse that, there's a pandemic going on, here's a bunch of extra money, use it how you want, regardless of whether you need it or not. And that's not a bailout anymore. That's a pile on of additional cash.
All right. Well, sounds like the only thing we really know is fiscal policy is going to be pretty interesting for the next year. Keeps these guys busy, which is what we like to see. Thanks for joining us today. And anyone else that's interested, you can go to mackinac.org and read up more on what's going on in fiscal and tax policy here in Michigan.